Hey guys, it's Joe Holka, excited for my first video here at FantasyLabs. We have a bunch of new upgrades to models, and I don't think it can really be understated how powerful this diversification slider is, as well as a couple of new rules that make it a bit easier to generate lineups with game stacks and correlation plays for tournaments. But I found myself with a bigger player pool than normal this past week, and to me it just set up perfectly for tournaments. And I also wanted to fire a bit into the last week of these major qualifiers on DraftKings, so I ended up max entering one of the $4 Qs, and though I won't be joining Bales and Peter in New York, I'm really encouraged with how the tools performed overall. In the past, I've typically preferred to go up in stakes a bit instead of mass multi-entering, but I've been really happy with the quality of lineups I'm seeing out of this lineup builder, so it's definitely something I'm excited to kind of build on going forward. I wanted to take this opportunity not necessarily to review the lineups or my specific exposures from the past week, but just to give you another perspective on some things you can do with the tools and some ways that I use them every week, especially to make my game stacks and kind of leverage some of the new features we have here. I won't spend too much time on this, but right or wrong, I had two main strategies for this qualifier. Is you obviously need first place for a ticket to the DK Championship at this lower buy-in level. So number one, I wanted exposure to the New Orleans-Detroit game, but mostly in game stacks and basically be underweight everywhere else. Mostly just to hedge a probably high-owned situation by at least having unique lineup construction if the game does happen to shoot out. If they don't, I have a lot more lineups that don't include some of those plays. So that worked out to some degree, but the second thing I really wanted to focus on was all week everyone's talking about how you need David Johnson and Le'Veon Bell, or at least one of those guys. So when I'm hearing something like that, I automatically want to be underweight in a tournament this top heavy. So I was underweight in regards to the field in favor of some lower owned elite wide receivers and a few running backs that I felt were in good tournament spots. So anyways, I like to do my game stacks first, kind of by creating groups, but also to be able to control the salary of my flex position in case I decide to do a late swap. So every game that ends, we have more and more information if a lineup is going to be an underdog or a contender. So it makes sense to do everything you can to at least give yourself a fighting chance if you're behind. And if you're ahead, maybe you don't need that 1% on play. To do this most efficiently, I start by using our team filter. This is where I filter out every game but the one I want to stack and a couple of the teams from the late games for just those dummy flex spots that I'm going to put in. So from there, it's just way easier. For example, I'll just go with Stafford, Riddick, Michael Thomas, Snead, and Bolden. Then in the flex spot, I want a little more salary, so I'll go ahead and lock in Odell Beckham. Save the group. And once you have all the groups you want and some exposure set for those groups, you can see I still have a couple in here from last week, but for the sake of this video, I'll just go ahead with equal exposures. And then before you go to the lineup builder, go back and add the rest of the teams back from the teams filter page. And once you have full access to your player pool again, you can click on the build lineups with my groups tab. So say you want 25 of your 150 lineups to include these game stacks, you can just go ahead and create those first before you go back to your main exposure weighting process. So moving that diversification slider over, let's say to a 6 and generate. So now you have all your game stacks and you're in a really good spot for late swaps as well, especially on a slate where there's some pretty attractive options in the later games. I'm just going to quick unlike these groups before I get to my main lineup page now that the game stacks are done and out of the way. Okay, so Bales already went over exactly how to use the slider itself, but essentially it just gives you the ability to diversify your lineups as much or as little as you would like, depending on where you place the slider. So higher number means more diversification of your player pool, basically. So really gives you a ton of flexibility over your player pool in general and the exposures you're targeting overall. So pretty awesome addition. Just going to change my settings quick, take out tight ends from the flex consideration and use one of our new filters where it's a bit easier to generate lineups with game stacks, but more importantly for this, just correlation plays, so you can just roll it back with some other guys I like, at least for my player pool. And then for this example, I'm going to quick click on the one running back per game option as well. Now that I have all my settings where I want them, I'm going to generate lineups. And you can see I have all my exposures here, 125 lineups since I have 25 game stacks. Last week I had Jeremy Hill at my top exposure, had a lot of Travis Kelce, but I did have a lot of Dorial Green-Beckham and quite a bit of Tyreek Hill, Doug Baldwin. So those are kind of my guys that were up top. I did thankfully have a good amount of Latavius Murray. Anyways, transitioning over to DraftKings quickly. This was my top lineup, and like I said, it was a 20,000 person field that almost filled, but I threw 150 lineups in there and had a slight sweat towards the end with Thomas Rawls. If he would have given me a little bit more, I might have had a real shot here. I was about, 15 or so points away from first place and the ticket to New York, but was really happy having quite a few lineups in the top 1,000 and a decent amount kind of in the top couple hundred there too. So that was nice to see. This was not necessarily a lineup that I had a ton of overall exposure to. You see a lot of my top exposure plays were in this lineup. Golden Tate, Travis Kelce. It was of all things, my Carson Palmer to Larry Fitzgerald stack that differentiated myself quite a bit from the field. Having Thomas Rawls at 2.1% was obviously huge. I thought for a minute we might have been on a 40 bomb type Thomas Rawls game. That sure would have been nice and gave me a shot. Part of the reason I like to have the slider more to the right is so that I have more of a splatter type effect for a tournament that's this top heavy. I don't necessarily want to lock in a core. Maybe that's the wrong strategy, but the strategy I like to do is just to have kind of an overall diversified portfolio of my exposures in general. So I kind of want to expose myself to some unique combinations as well as have some late swap opportunities if one of those combinations does start to go off. The point is really there's just so many customization options that tailor to your own lineup building process and really your own just personal goals and game selection. So I find that kind of flexibility extremely appealing. Definitely looking forward to cheering on Bales and Peter this week, along with the rest of the guys representing FantasyLabs in the DraftKings Championship. Hope to be there with you guys next year.